And there are 5 kinds of wars, and they start in this order, just sequentially, typically. A trade war, a technology war, a geopolitical influence war. Then you get into a capital and economic warfare, which we are now with sanctions. They always happened in history. And then there's a military war.
Ray Dalio has been sounding the alarm about the fact that we are at the final stages of a long-term debt cycle. In a recent interview, he said that the US is at the beginning of a late big cycle debt crisis. These late stages of long-term debt cycles, which happen once every 75 to 100 years, are already unfolding. And that's what Ray Dalio has been warning about recently. The end result of these long-term debt cycles are usually huge changes and disruptions in terms of the economic landscape as well as the dominating world powers. Some of the typical signs of these final stages of those long-term debt cycles, according to Ray Dalio, are usually things like high sovereign debt levels, internal divide within a country, as well as a rising external power that challenges the current dominating one. All of these signs are already being manifested today in terms of the unprecedented high sovereign debt levels, the deepening internal divide between the left and the right, as well as the geopolitical tensions and conflicts that are happening today. But what are exactly some of the current economic challenges that Ray Dalio is foreseeing ahead, and where does he expect that to lead us in the near future? Here's what he said.
In my opinion, we are at the beginning of a very classic late big cycle debt crisis, when the supply-demand gap, when you're producing too much debt, and you have also a shortage of buyers. What's happening now, as we have to sell all this debt, is we then do you have enough buyers? There are changes now in terms of the quantities in the world that are being held by large investors around the world that have lost money in these treasury bonds and so on. And then there are geopolitical changes which are having an effect. Some cases, some countries are worried about sanctions, and then there's this geopolitical shift. So when I look at the supply-demand issue, there's a supply-demand issue for that debt. There's a lot of debt. It has to be bought, has to have a high enough interest rate.
So apparently, there's a supply and demand issue when it comes to government bonds. This issue came about due to the recent debt ceiling raise that was agreed upon a couple of months ago to prevent a potentially catastrophic default on US debt repayments, which would have had a severe impact for the whole global economy if the debt ceiling was not raised. And as a result of this raise, the newly issued debt in the form of government bonds needs to be purchased by investors, whether they are small average investors or even countries. As of January of 2023, almost half of the foreign US owned debt was held by 5 countries, where Japan is leading the list with $1.1 trillion, followed by China and the UK. The countries that have significantly dropped their ownership of these bonds are countries like Russia, China, and Indonesia, due to short-term capital needs as well as the fear of sanctions. Although the purchasing of US debt has always been considered as a very safe investment for both average investors and also countries, the recent geopolitical tensions have worsened things and made some countries even more hesitant to buy and hold US bonds, mainly because of fear of potential sanctions.
The amount of selling of government debt collapsed, right? We didn't issue government debt. And now we're going to issue a lot of government debt. And so when we look at the buyers, there appears to be a shortage, a significant shortage of the buyers for that government debt. But we're now at the brink of being able to see what that supply-demand picture looks like as we go over the next year and two.
Now, Ray Dalio believes that interest rates are likely to stay at their current levels for a while, since inflation has been declining recently, and also due to the fact that we are right now about halfway through the short-term debt cycle, which occurs once every 7 to 8 years. During short-term debt cycles, there are 2 prominent phases: an expansion phase, which is the bull market, and a contraction phase, which is the bear market. The expansion phase is characterized by an increase in asset prices and economic activity, and the contraction phase is characterized by a decrease in inflation, employment rate, as well as asset prices, amongst other things. So according to Ray Dalio, he is expecting a weaker economy moving forward since we are about halfway through this cycle, and also due to inflation just starting to cool down.
On this short-term debt cycle, I call it, the 7-year cycle, we're about halfway through. In other words, interest rates are now at a level that they're probably going to stay at, but they're probably not going to rise much from here, and there's tightness. And the consequences of that are going to be a weaker economy going forward. It doesn't have to be a big downturn because of the household sector, but it is a balance sheet kind of recession. And I think things are going to get worse in the economy. There's a financial issue at the same time as you have this internal conflict.
In addition to this, Dalio expressed some concerns about the rising polarity and the political divide between the left and the right. He highlighted the rising need for a bipartisan middle where people can come together and find common ground, since this political divide is not sustainable and could lead to social unrest and even more economic instability, which according to him are typical signs of the late stages of a long-term debt cycle. Here's what he said.
I think it's very clear that there is only one good outcome, if we can, and that's a strong bipartisan middle, because either of the extremes is not going to be able to be dominant. The small right, or even the small left, and as a result, we're seeing a fragmentation. Geographically, you're seeing people move to different areas, not just because of taxes, but of differences in values and so on. And so you're seeing this separation. I think over the next 2 years, the real question is, can we have a strong bipartisan middle, or are we going to have that kind of fragmentation?
So all of these factors, in addition to the massive wealth gap between the rich and the poor, are a rising concern, which are leading to even more uncertainty for the near future. Now finally, Ray Dalio talked about the fact that we are about to enter a time warp due to the new advancements of artificial intelligence. And in the next few years, we're going to have a very different world on the other side. But his main concerns remain if this technology is going to be used to improve people's lives for the better, or the exact opposite of that.
So I'm extremely excited. I think that this is the greatest revolution, bigger than the internet revolution. But like technology, it really depends. The problem isn't with the technology. The problem is with the people who use the technology. Will that technology be used to raise humanity's living standards, or will that be used for war, in a sense, for hurting each other? And so, but any way we're going to cut it, if you take those 5, we're going to go through a time warp. If we take the next 5 to 10 years, in the next 5 to 10 years, it's like going to go through a time warp. We're going to come out the other side, and you're going to see a very completely different world.
So given the current internal and economic conditions that the US is facing today and the whole global landscape, Ray Dalio obviously believes that we are at the beginning of a late big cycle debt crisis, and he is not alone in this belief. The national debt level has reached an all-time high level where it is very hard to be sustained, and eventually it will lead to a significant downturn. And this is why us as investors should be very cautious and aware of that. So that was it for this video. If you found this helpful, you can click here to watch this one. Other than that, make sure to leave a thumbs up and to subscribe to the channel. And with that being said, see you in the next one.